Alright, I've been asked a million times how to do sourdough, and how to keep it alive, how to feed it, how to make it. So I thought I'll put a couple of videos together, just assisting people on how to actually I follow the process, which I think is relatively easy. But we'll do this is part one, which is purely just getting the starter ready for actually making the dough later this afternoon and the bread. So pretty much these two buckets have two different types of flour. I have a rye and a white. Main reason for that, I have two separate starters, one rye starter, one white starter. That is just standard tap water. They say use filtered water. I use tap water, or if the kettle was cold, I'd use kettle water. There are the chlorines in the water that can affect it a little bit. Some people will say use purified water. I've never had much issue with tap water on the coast, so I just use that. But again, it's trial and error for people. I've got a glass bowl. I never like putting the starter in stainless steel or any of those type of metal bowls. I've always preferred it in a glass bowl. So, and as you can see, with how many scratches are on the bottom, that shows how much I've used this for thing, because I mix with a knife, so it kind of scratches up the bottom. You got your scales, which are hyper important, and then I just use a knife and a spoon. The spoon is to get the flour out of the containers. The knife is to do the mixing. Oh, and I'll also get some paper towel because I tend to wipe it off rather than wash them. As I use the utensils, I'll wipe them off so I don't mix the starters together. So I'll just grab some of that now. So we're at, 8 o'clock in the morning. Normally I'd start this at 6, but I thought a bit later. So I'll get my starters out of the fridge. They've been in there for a week in weck jars. I prefer the weck jars, or your pickling jars, so we'll just grab that and we'll work with that. So as you can see, two separate starters. We have my white, it's been in there a week, and we have the rye. And you can see there's good bubbles in it, and they've been sitting there. When they go in the fridge, which you'll see later today, they'd have no bubbles. So they just sit in there, and this is what happens with it just sitting in the fridge. And they're set at the back of the fridge, so there's not too much temperature variation. They'll stay in the fridge for about a couple of weeks. I've actually tried a test, which was off another show, which took a starter, stuck it on a bench for 3 weeks, and left it there for 3 weeks, and came back and tried it, and it still works surprisingly. So it is relatively hard to kill them. The one thing that will kill them is either bad quality water, or if you do not rinse and wash your utensils. You've got to make sure your utensils are clean, because any detergent will kill the yeast. So if you've only got one, you would just follow what I do with one of them. Because I use two, I kind of do this process. So first thing I'll do is technically take 50% or about 50% out of each of these jars, and I put that into the bowl. If you've only got one jar, then technically you'd only do it for one of them. It's just because I have two, I just mix the two together. I normally make quite a few loaves. So we'll just take out, as you can see there, it's about 50%. You won't see it on the inside, but there is about 50% of that gone on that one. Normally these are about an 80-gram feed, which we will do soon anyway. Okay, and remember, because I don't want to mix my starters, I just wipe off the utensil. Don't wash it, don't clean it, just wipe it off, and it's fine. And the difference, as you can see here, the rye is really stiff, the white is really quite runny, and if you look in there, it's actually quite stringy. So just two different consistencies because of the two different flours. Okay, so now we've got 50% of the mixture out of these two jars, and some people say you leave a quarter, some people say leave X number of grams. I've just been pulling 50% out, and I've been doing this for 7 years, and it seems to work. All right, the next thing I'll do, turn the scales on. So we zero that out, and it looks like someone's put it on kilos, so we'll just switch that. Okay, so this is the one I will use to make bread. These ones will get fed again, which I'll explain. I feed these twice. I'll feed them now, and then I'll feed them again at about probably 2 or 3 o'clock, and then they go in the fridge. And the reason I feed them twice is just to make them active again before I stick it in the fridge, so that it ensures they last long enough. So in this one, in this bowl, which we've probably got, honestly, what do we got? Yeah, it's probably got about 200 to 300 grams of starter in there anyway. I'll go and add, so this is just the white flour. This is standard, good quality bread flour. Don't use you can use your plain flours and stuff like that, but I tend to find good quality bread flour is the best way to go. So I've put about 100, in this case it's about 115, but about 100 to 120 grams in there. And then I'll match it with just a fraction more water. And the only reason why I say that is because it comes out of the fridge, it's a bit stiff, and I want a slightly looser mixture when I mix it in with the bread rather than the stiff mixture. It just makes it a bit easier to move around, but not too loose. Okay, so we're looking for a dough consistency. So that's that one done. I'll just set that aside. Okay, now I do the same. I'll actually grab the white one next. So again, we put the white one on there, zero that out. Beautiful. And then, but with these jars, because of their size, I'll only put about 80 grams in this time. Okay, and I will go, there it is, and I will go 1 to 1. Okay, so what I mean by 1 to 1 is I'll go for the same amount of water as I put in flour weight, I add the same. So if it was 80 grams of flour, it's 80 grams of water. Okay, now my rice starter, just zero that one out, cool. Now I add a tiny bit of white to my rye, okay? The reason I do that, and when I mean a tiny bit, it's like 10 grams. The reason I do that is purely and simply because from what I've been told, it just helps keep the structure. If you want a pure rye, you can run a pure rye. This was originally a pure rye, but I tended to then add that little bit of white. Did I notice much difference? Not really, but then it's just become habit and I've kept it going. But if you're gluten intolerant and you want to make pure rye, then please, by all means, just omit that bit of white flour that I've added. Okay, so now we have all 3 jars filled up with a bit of water and the flour in them accordingly. Okay, so we take the knife. I use a knife. You can use spatulas. You can use whatever you want. But I prefer a knife personally. So in this case, I just scrape around the outside because you can see the jar's still got a bit of the starter sitting up on the side. And then just, again, mix it up. Now, depending on how much water you added, will depend on what the consistency is. Someone said to me, thick pancake mix. Some other ones have said a firm dough if you want a dry starter. The more flour you add, the less water you add, the longer your starter will technically last because the yeast is feeding on the flour, on the carbohydrates and the gluten and stuff like that. So it depends on how thick you want it. But like in this case, this one's actually quite doughy. Almost, it's like if you've ever made bread before and you've done this process and you've used 95% hydration bread, this is what it's like. It's sticky, it's doughy, but as you can see, it won't pour. Okay? So it won't move. Now, because I use 2, and again, I don't want to contaminate, this is contaminated anyway. It's got both of them in there. So I'll mix one on its own in isolation. Then I'll mix this one. Remember, I added a little bit of water to this one, a little bit more, just to try and loosen it up. So, again, and you can hear that. Scrape that off. So this is actually still quite thick, and that's mostly because of the rye. As you can see, again, it is really, it still moves, but it's a bit thick. But that's all right. Listen, I'll leave it like that. I'll work with it like that. That's not a problem. Again, not washing. I don't want to wash the thingos. You could run them in a bit of clean water if you wanted to, and just run your fingers along it and clean it like that, so to speak. But I don't bother. I just wipe it down. Now I'll cling wrap this later. Put that there. Now again, the rye bread. So, or the rye starter. We'll just mix that up. And again, it's completely different. If you make a rye one, they are easier to start. I think it took 5 days for me 8 years ago to start my white. And then the rye is probably about 4 years old, and that one literally took 3 days. Okay, so what I'll do is just push them down a little bit. Okay, and that's technically done. So I'll put the lid back on that. And you notice there's no seals on these, and again, that's because it has to breathe. So now we have our 2 starters that are what I keep going, and we've got the one that we will make bread out of. Now, just to show you guys this, I'll use a marker. I can't mark the ones that have come out of the fridge, but I can mark this one. We're going to put a mark there, okay, on it, and I will say, what's the time? 8 a.m. All right, so at 8 a.m, it's there. what I'm expecting to happen now, inside my house right now, it is probably about 20 something degrees. It is quite cool. You can see I'm wearing a jumper and tracksuit pants. Not exactly the most fashionable, but hey, it is what it is. So we'll just cling wrap that. And where this stuff will go, and where I normally keep it, is actually just on top of the fridge. And that's just because, one, it keeps it out of the way of my son, and two, it gives me an ability to keep an eye on it. Okay? So I will pop these up there. So now, for you, you could keep it somewhere warm. If you're in a really, really cold climate, I recommend, if you have an oven, now my light bulb's blown in my oven, unfortunately, turn it to the defrost mode, which is normally just the light, and put it in there. Okay, it will keep it about 25 something. Keep an eye on the temperature in there. If you open up and it's really quite warm, turn it off. You kind of want that, a cool summer's Australian day, about that 25, or not early summer, so spring day, about that 25 to 26 degree point is about where it's nice. In 30s and 40s, it will rise a lot quicker. You can go and do all the research. They say that depending on the temperature, depends on the different gases that are produced and how your bread will affect differently. I don't go to that level. Okay, I just make nice bread that everyone seems to be really happy with. So I just prefer consistencies. So we're going to stick this up there. I'll put it up there, and then what I'll do is, after this is done, we've got our mark. Whoop, the cling wrap kind of rubbed it off a little bit. We still have our mark there. In a couple of hours, I'll take this and I'll show you, or I'll take some photos and I'll show you what it looks like. See you in a few.